successful your show will be, even when you're not feeling like doing the show. And releasing Thursday nights, 10 o'clock, it went online. And sometimes I get in there in the studio and it'd be like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. And other times it would be Friday morning. And finally I said, you know what? I'm not going to try and do for 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night on Thursday. I'm going to put it up Friday morning or Friday afternoon when I'm ready. But I stayed true to that schedule bi-weekly, and I stayed true to it, and I let my audience know, and I set that standard. All of a sudden, everyone was okay with it, because as a consumer, they had an expectation that I met, which is key. And a lot of times, when you tell your audience that you're having an issue with your podcast, they'll help you get through to what their expectation is. Because if you're doing a daily show, and they're not, you don't feel like doing it every day, and you tell your audience that, and they say, well, actually, I only listen to your show 2 times a week. You've got a clear indication of what your audience is expecting from you content-wise. They're not expecting a daily show. In your head, you might think, I got to do this every day. Your audience is only expecting something twice or, whatever their expectation is. And that's the key thing of overcoming this PodFade, is understanding your relationship with your audience and overcoming it.
Yeah, I think another important thing is, you got to be passionate about whatever it is you're talking about. And if, what you're talking about kind of you're not so much into, or you're not as into it as you thought you were, you can just change your show or try a different format or do an experiment. If you have a music show and you do talk and then a song and then talk and then a song, and maybe you don't have music to play, or you want to change it up, you just want to talk, you can do that. You can just say,
There's no rule.
Yeah, as long as you're passionate and you're connecting with the audience, which it's all about the honesty and the relationship and that you have with your audience. As long as you're just upfront and be like, you know what, I'm going to try something new to see if it's fun, then you can do that. For example, my show, I do a music/talk show, and my shows started getting really long because I kept putting more and more music into it, and it went from half-an-hour shows to an hour, and I had some that were 2 hours or more, and it was getting ridiculous. And I sort of sat down and thought about sort of what the issue was. And what I've done with my show now is I've broken it up. I have a music show once a week where it's just music, and then I have a half-hour show where I play music and talk, and I broke it up, and I told people I'm changing the format because it was getting difficult to edit, and it was getting difficult to do my show notes and post it, and I think, I don't have 3 hours to do the show tonight, but when you break it up, I now do more shows a week, but because I've broken it up and I've announced to people that I'm going to change the way I do things, it's now been easier for me to do stuff.
Yeah. And that's part of with PodFade. I mean, in the very beginning, we said, if you're experiencing PodFade, it's probably because of the technology issue or an audience issue where you aren't engaged or understand your audience properly, or that you've run out of topics to talk about in your show. And we've talked about why it's important to engage your audience. But the thing that we're all here to figure out is, how do you overcome PodFade? How do you overcome that issue? And we were discussing it, and Brent touched on it before. If you have time to do a best of issue, you might have 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 podcasts. Your listeners might have dropped in and out for not all of them, but only some of them. Taking the time to pick the content you think is the best content of your show, and you don't have 10 hours to do a podcast, you've only got 45 minutes. Glean through some of your favorite shows. Pick 5 minutes. Pick the best 5 minutes. Do a best of. Here you go. All of a sudden, you beat PodFade you beat that issue that you were ever fighting, whatever you're fighting for one more week. Doing a how-to podcast or a how-to episode. If you're doing a show about video blogging, and you don't know what to talk about, hey guys, I don't have anything to talk about today, but I thought it'd be really cool to talk about how I do this, so you can do it too. You engage in your audience, you create content, and part of what we're doing as podcasters, there's 2 types of content. There's content that's time sensitive and has a value for, like a rocket boom, has a value of 2 or 3 days. And then there's content that's evergreen, that lasts forever. If you have problems doing your show and you're going through some kind of PodFade experience, instead of focusing on the topic you normally do, focus on topics that are evergreen, that no matter how often you do your show, it's something that every single listener or any person on the internet would want to discover. If it's video blogging, how did you do it? Do a show on hey, you know what, I've been doing all these shows and I realized nobody knows how I do this. Well, here are the technologies I use. In my case, when I do music podcasts and I don't know what to talk about, I talk about the sites that I visit to get music. And all of a sudden, I rattled out 15 minutes, and that 15 minutes is the best 15 minutes that have, I get more content and more emails from my listening audience, because they're like, that was a great show. I never visited that site. I didn't know you were on that site. They add me as their friends or whatever. And it's one of those weeks that I really didn't know what to talk about on the show, but I talked about a piece of evergreen content, like a how-to, and all of a sudden I've got this new enthusiasm of people who are contacting me back and giving me new content to talk about, because that dialogue creates new content. And then the other thing that, like Brent was talking about, is changing your format. If you're doing a podcast and it's all video, and you're like, oh, I don't want to turn on the camera, I don't want to deal with this, turn on a microphone. Make a PDF. I regularly put out PDFs in my feed. There are technologies that you can use so that if you don't have content that's valuable to you, you can create and find other types of content that might be valuable to your listeners. So changing your format allows you to discover new areas to explore with your audience. And if your audience likes it, and if you work with your audience, you will develop it even better and into something that they will want to see more of, which again helps you be PodFade, which is really cool.
And another thought along the same lines is, as we have PodFade, there's also PodHide, or when you're at the top of your game, feel free to shelf some of those.
Yeah.
You don't have to have it come out today. And it can be one of those things, well, I'm kind of in a downer right now. Let me take a look at my catalog here. Oh, you have never heard this. This is me doing whatever, and here you go.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other side of it is, if you have a format that you're sticking to where it has to be live, create content that isn't live that you can shelf. Or create different formats of your show that allow you to, bookmark it for later. Because that's what this is all about. It's you're building a relationship with your audience. And if you don't define the boundaries of what that relationship is, if they come to expect your show daily, weekly, monthly, whatever, you have to stick to that relationship. You have to build on that relationship, or define what you think that relationship is going to be in the future with it. And to use my show as an example, I started my show as an excuse to make music, so people could see how to make music. So I could teach people how to make electronic music, which I thought was this mysterious wallpaper that people interacted with but didn't know about. And in the beginning, I put out a lot of songs, and I realized I can come up with little packages, little releases that I can give out and say, hey, here's a bunch of songs I did. They're for download on my website. And it gave benchmarks and earmarks. So when my listeners started getting into it, and if I was having a hard week, because they started having that dialogue, emailing me, hey, I like that song, that was really cool. When I had issues on what I was going to do with my show, I went back and read through some of the comments and some of the interests, and realized I could go and talk about that song again, or I can go and talk about how I made that song, and it gave content. It changed the show format. It changed what I was doing, and it was, like you said, it's that shelf life stuff. That put it on a shelf and you pull it down later and look at it.
In some of my shows, I'm a big info junkie, and I just research random stuff and then share it on the show. And sometimes I don't have something new to talk about, but maybe I can revisit something I spoke about, 6 months ago or something like that. Like something that maybe it's changed, or maybe there's new information about it, or I now have another thought on what I think about this. You can just go back and look at stuff that you've already talked about or already presented and sort of repackage it, and it keeps some continuity going in your show as well. That people know that you're not just pushing stuff out there. You're thinking back on the stuff that you've done.
You're building and forming on the brand. Yeah.
Can I make a couple suggestions?
Yeah, please do.
Some of the things that I've done, first of all, you got to keep your energy up, because that carries over to your listeners.
Yeah.
And you got to do things to do that. And it can be as simple as, instead of sitting down, put the mic in a stand and stand up and do a podcast. Use different equipment, different software. I normally edit in Cool Edit or Audacity, that type of thing, where you multi-track things, you can drag them around and get everything just so, and crossfade it, and it's very time consuming, and by the time you're done, you just want to get it over with. Sometimes, to keep that energy up, I've found, switch to Cast Blaster,
Yeah.
where everything, it's on the clock, and you're doing it in real time, hitting that button at the right time, and that helps keep the energy up.
Yeah.
And equipment even. Everybody gets tired of driving an old clunker, but even the drive to work is fun in a new car.
Oh yeah, or a new
So
microphone,
Get
a new
a new
headphone.
microphone, get a new audio interface, some fancy USB thing, if you can afford it, or borrow one or something.
Well, yeah, that was.
And try new things in your setup, and that can help. And one thing I've done recently, I'm out of town this weekend, I'm here, so I normally would be putting a podcast out. I try to get one out like Friday or Saturday. Couldn't do it this week, even though I have the material waiting. I put together a short one last night in the hotel room, 9 minutes long, just explaining, hey, I'm at PodCamp Toronto. I'm here learning about podcasting. I'm going to be putting some great shows in with what I learned here this weekend. Played an Uncle Seth song, talked about the bands we saw last night. Bingo. 9 minutes, at least you communicate to your listeners what's going on, why your regular show wasn't there.
Yeah. And the more you keep them informed, the easier it gets to get through those times.
Your audience can be awfully forgiving of sort of, as long as you're honest with them, you let them know that you're there's something affecting sort of the way your show normally is. As long as you let them know. Like for example, a few weeks ago I got really busy with work and I didn't have time to get home and do a show. I'd get home and go to bed. So I just started recording sort of on my walk home on the iRiver. And I just did this show that way. And I'm like, you know what? I haven't had time to do the show. I know I'm a couple days late. So how about I just have a talk with you guys on my way home and I'll play a song at the end of it. And you got to switch it up.
Your audience appreciates that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I find it with regards to what you were saying before about, maybe trying to change the format if you're getting bored or whatever. If you're able to gain the trust of your audience enough, then I could basically put anything down the pipe that I want to. And I'll be like, I'll just throw it down, and maybe not everybody will appreciate it, but I'll get a good percentage of the people that I know that are listening, that care about it, and we really appreciate that, we like this new kind of thing or whatever. And that ability to have a channel, no matter what it is that you put down there, and to be able to reach people is very valuable.
Oh, and it's a valuable relationship that requires fostering, because if you did that on the regular, it would be harder. But if you're doing that because you're having that week or 2 weeks where you're not available to do the shows you normally do, you're like, look, this is something I thought was really cool, give it a try. It's perfect. It gives you the opportunity to do it. And to forward on the idea of the technology issue, if you get to a point where you can't, you have a week or 2 or 3 that you can't do shows, if you find a podcast that supports your show, or a community like some of your listeners, turn it to your listeners, or twin with another podcast and say, hey guys, I'm not available this week because I'm going to be sequestered in court. But here's some listener content, here's some listener content that's really cool that is part of our show. Or here's this other podcast that I really believe in that is part of my community that you guys might know about or might not know about. So I'm kind of going to have them guest host the show for a little while until I can come back from my jury duty, whatever thing. And that's also with technology. Change your microphones. Someone else is doing a pod show, and we all know other podcasters. I got this really cool mic. You got to give it a try. Let's do some kind of barter thing, because I'm just tired of looking at this mic. I'm tired of this headphone setup. Tired of this software. What are you doing? What's new and fresh? Because as a podcaster, every time you hit that fading part, it's because it's not fresh anymore, and your audience will feel it. But if you find ways to make it, and all this is just tricks on how to keep it fresh to you, so your audience has something interesting to come to. Yeah.
I find that I tend to be a very confronted interviewer, and I find if I get a half a dozen placid pussycats in a row, I'm falling asleep. So I will interject a confronted interviewee who will really take me on, and it jazzes me up for the next 6.
Yeah, and that's important. That's important to keep with your content, because one of the secrets I learned early on is if you talk in your podcast with a smile, whether you're smiling or not, you just get the corners of your mouth up, you automatically sound like you're smiling. Whether you're smiling or not doesn't matter. But if you talk like that, you sound like you're smiling on the radio. And that was one of the things I learned early on, that if I went in, I used to do my podcast at like 2 in the morning, because I would, I go in the studio, I make a song, I might have started it a couple days ago, and it'll be like 1 a.m., I finally got that techno song done, and I'm excited, and I want to do the podcast, and the whole time I sound like this. Hey, it's Vergel Evans, it's Alex 7, I know something in that square, I just finished a song, it's awesome. I don't do that anymore. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, I go to bed, I get up at 7, my podcast is only 20 minutes long. It takes me 20 minutes to record it. So I get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm super awake, I take a shower, I go downstairs, I record the podcast, I play the song, done. And that was one of the things I learned, that because my listeners were picking up on that. They were hearing my exhaustion, and they were going, this guy's tired. I'm tired from listening to this guy being tired. And it changed the show. It totally changed, and the mouth thing.
Yeah, I recently changed the technology I use in my show. I started off with like a Radio Shack headset mic that I got for like $5. And then after I was really into it, I went and bought like a mixer and like a condenser mic. And I don't even bother with that thing anymore, because the time it would take to like plug everything in and get everything all set up, if I was not really feeling up to the task, I just wouldn't do it. And it was just like another barrier stopping me from doing my show. So now I record either like on my MP3 player on my iRiver, or I just use the mic on my laptop. And as long as the content's there, like I don't care necessarily about the quality of the sound, as long as like I'm talking about something interesting or I'm playing some good music, that to me is all I need for like my show. I don't even bother with that mic. That mic's been sitting like in a closet since before Christmas, and I don't even bother with it anymore, because it was just blocking me from doing what it was I wanted to do, which is just put out content.
Yeah, so if you're looking for a mic and you want to trade mics,
Yeah.
you gotta talk.
What do you got the deal?
Yeah, and you even know why. But the big thing about this, because up until now we're talking about all the things to keep the show going. There are times where a show doesn't make sense anymore. I mean, like if you're doing a show about being single in the city and you get married, how do you do a podcast about being single in the city? You can't do it.
Bring in experts.
Yeah, well, yeah, or yeah, you can bring in experts, but
pass the show to somebody else.
yeah, and you can pass the show to someone else. But these are things, is if you tell your audience and let your audience know, because if you're doing a show about being single in the city and you're in a relationship, how often are you going to want to do a show about being single? You're in a different time and place.
And your audience also is going to now think, well, why are you talking to me about being single when, you're
Yeah.
broke up?
So
issue.
yeah, exactly. Because and I'm sure you guys have heard this all weekend. A lot of what podcasting is, it's about trust and it's about faith, and it's those soft skills and things. I brought up the Bridezilla thing earlier. When we thought Bridezilla was a legitimate video on YouTube, we all freaked out. Oh my God! It raised all kinds of emotions. As soon as we realized it wasn't a real video, it was dead air to us. It doesn't even. I hate to say it, YouTube has gone down a number of notches for the value of valid, real content on the internet. I now treat it as another marketing gimmicky, and if I see something and it's anywhere near cool, I instantly go, it's a gimmick. I don't believe in it. Which is sad, because Bridezilla took a lot of the innocence about podcasting and a lot of innocence about internet content out and away from us, and we'll never get that back. Yeah.
As a musician, I'm not sure if you not find value in music. I find there's so much music there, I don't even listen to my CDs anymore.
No, but this is the whole thing. People who put their music up there in earnest, like you're a musician, you have a song. I'm a musician too. I use YouTube for that exact same thing. But you are going at it in all honesty. There's so
much of it out there. I'm not looking for the virtual parts anyway. Like I'm looking for, it's my favorite band playing live in New York in 1974.
Yeah.
It's there. It's there.
No, as a resource, if I'm looking for that content, I will go and look in YouTube for that content. But if I happen to find some piece of content with someone cutting their hair and freaking out, and I'm like, oh my God, it's not, I instantly wonder if it's genuine. A band performing live, and there's a YouTube clip, that's genuine. You can't fake that. You can't, okay, they could be Milli Vanilli or whatever, but the majority of the people and the majority of stuff that is like that has a certain level of legitimacy to it. And that's the big balance, and that's the thing that over this whole weekend, of PodCamp is in the background, and then you have to understand and realize as a content creator, you're creating content, and that your listeners and your viewers or whatever your audience is has a belief that there's a level of legitimacy and honesty to it, and if you ignore them and you ignore the value of their time in your content, then you are kind of you're co-opting the time and the value that they put into the show, and any possibility that in the future, when you get passionate again for your show, for them to continue believing in you or participating or being a part of your environment or your community, however you engage in.
Yeah, we got to wrap it up. We're out of time.
So we're out. But just to wrap it up really quick, if you plan on ending the podcast, if you go through, you go through PodCamp, you decide, time and place of life you changed, let your audience know, give them an alternative. CSI ends, you've got CSI New York, CSI Miami. You got Star Trek ends, you've got the Star Trek Next Generation or Deep Space Nine or whatever. Package your content. If you have a show that's really interesting, we're talking about a comedy show where, this guy's doing 1 year's worth of episodes. His show's going to end in March. Package that content, make it available as the final. This is the result. Give your audience closure, because a lot of what this is about is it's an interactive experience. And if your audience doesn't have closure, they will not respect you when you try to do your next podcast.
All right.
That's it.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I think that was from the cameraman, yeah?